So here I am in the IntelliJ IDEA. I still have training demo. So I'll just click on File and Open, and I'll go to the Downloads folder, which is where the order service is. Now these steps might actually vary based on the editor that you are using. But eventually, most of the editors are able to find a Maven file in the folder, in the parent folder, and they are able to, you know, pull the settings that are required for a Maven project, right? So I'll just say trust the project. And since I already have a training demo project, it's asking if I need to open it in the same window or a new one. I'll say open it in a new window, right? So here we are with the order service. It's just downloading the dependencies that we have already configured in our pom.xml. So once again, if we go and look at our pom.xml, we have this Spring Boot starter parent, which is basically going to have a lot of auto-configured libraries, right? Which Spring Web is going to need. So uh, as we go along, we'll see what are the different libraries that Spring Boot Starter Web will download as part of its dependencies, as part of auto configuration for Spring Boot Starter Web, right? And once all these libraries are downloaded and they are available on your class path, as a developer, I do not have to, include those libraries explicitly in the pom.xml file. They are automatically downloaded and added to the uh, class path. So that's what Spring Boot calls as an opinionated approach, right? So Spring Boot will automatically figure out the libraries that are required for, let's say, Spring Boot Starter Web, and it's going to add it onto your class path with the default configurations, right? So we, as you can see, we have just added this Spring Boot Starter Web and the Lombok library, and we know that the test library would be available. We have seen it in the previous videos as well, that we don't have to explicitly add it, but it adds it for us, right? And if you continue scrolling down, you'll see this Maven plugin, which is basically used to build your code, basically resolve all the dependencies, right? And we have the Lombok as well, which is excluded uh, from this configuration. Right, so from here on, let's go to the SRC folder, right? And main and Java. So we just have this order service application, uh, right? We have seen this even in the training videos. This is this starting point for the Spring Boot application, right? And I do not have anything in this application as of now, right? I can start it, but uh, there's nothing basically that we can do, right? So just to quickly, and as you can see, it's again asking me to enable the annotation processing because it was not enabled by default, right? So you see that IntelliJ IDEA is quite intelligent in that sense, and it's giving me pop-ups to basically enable the annotation processing, which is good, right? So the application is also started. There's no way I can test it right now because we don't have any endpoint that we could potentially test, right? So I'm going to stop this service, and let's now create the first package, right? And we call it the controller package, right? This is where we will create our first controller, the controller class, which will have all the REST endpoints related to order, right? And with that, we'll create our very first class and we'll call it the order controller class, right? So this order controller class, as we had seen earlier, is a REST controller, right? So it's a REST controller basically, and it's also if I just press a control or command based on your keyboard and just click on this REST controller, you'll see that it is actually wrapping a few controllers, a few annotations here, right? One is the response body. So in the old style of uh, defining REST endpoints, this response body had to be put on top of each REST endpoint. And we'll see that in a bit, right? How we create REST endpoints. But With the newer versions of the annotations, the REST controller annotation, we don't have to do that because by default there is a there is a response body that comes along with the REST controller, right? So we don't have to explicitly add a response body annotation on top of every REST endpoint, right? And we'll see that in a bit, right? And that is why this REST controller has been created on top of the controller annotation, so that we can add more and more features and wrap those features around a REST controller annotation, right? So with that bit of understanding, we have created our first order controller class. We have marked it with @REST controller, right? And let's write our very first uh, REST endpoint, and we'll create a get mapping because we're using this to fetch information of the orders, right? So we'll write an endpoint which basically fetches all the information um, for of all the orders, to be frank. Let's go with a very simplified endpoint for now and say get all orders. Right, so this is the endpoint that we are writing. I've just added a bit of a Java doc over there, right? And this is a get mapping because we are writing an HTTP get method, right? And we will call this as, if you remember, we were having an API versioning called V1, and we will call it orders, right? And that's it, right? That could be a good enough URL, right? And I can write a function here which says return a list of orders, right? And the function name could be get all orders, right? And as of now, I'm not expecting any input from the user for this. If I was expecting any input, then I would have to pass that as part of a request parameter or this functions parameter. But for this particular endpoint, since there is no filter criteria, we are not passing anything with respect to the user or the order. It is just get all orders. So this will be an empty in terms of input. We are not expecting any input from this function, right? From this API. So as this order class does not exist, so the editor is complaining about it. So I'll just say create a class called order. In case you don't see this as an option in your editor, you may have to create it yourself, right? Just create a class called order, but not in the controller package. We'll create it in a model package. So the model package doesn't exist, which means it will have to now create a package and then add a class called order, right? So as you can see, it has now created an order class. It's currently an empty class. It doesn't have any fields, but at least we have a compiling code here. Well, not really compiling, but at least the order class is now resolved, right? So now for for simplicity, we will just say return uh, a list of, and I pass a new order, right? I'm not passing anything. The order class is completely empty, but at least we now have a compiling piece of code. So what we have done here is we have created a REST endpoint, right, which has the URI of /v1/orders. When called from any client or browser, we will return a list of all the orders that exist in the system. Like currently, we don't have any orders. In fact, we are not even trying to check if there are any orders. I'm just creating a list of an order object and returning that, right? So this is the first endpoint that we have written, and let's quickly see if it is running.